introduction. Nick, Kenny.
I don't know what you do, man. I don't know.
Good.
I didn't do anything. Every time you come here, you destroy my family. My house is always nice and calm, and you come here and just destroy it. Jenna gets a messing up.
Air 5. Hey, Chris Kenny, I don't think anyone was... Nothing. No idea. I was like, what are we talking about? I don't think anyone was expecting Carson Wentz to give an MVP performance in his first game back last week. Coming off knee surgery, coming off the highest of high expectations. Wentz was decent in his debut, throwing for over 250 yards and a touchdown in a win over the Colts. He's back at again this weekend to face the Tennessee Titans. His head coach fully understands and expects an upward trajectory with his play as the season goes on.
I think things will, come into focus a little bit more for him this week. Did some great things, obviously, last week, and not only through the air, but with his arm and how he managed, the run game. And I just think that the more reps and the more time he's out there, it just gets better and better. Things will begin to slow down, and we start getting more of the pieces around him back. Will also help.
Chris, expectations were tempered in game one, the first week that Carson Wentz saw a little play action here. But what about for week two? Do they open things up a little bit more for him?
Well, I don't know if they necessarily need to open things up. I think they'll have more in the game plan because Carson Wentz would have settled down. He won't necessarily have the emotions going like he did coming back because this is his first real game action since that injury in December. But I like what Doug Peterson tried to do at the beginning of that game, using that turbo tempo, letting Carson get into a rhythm. And, oh, by the way, standardizing that Colts defense. Colts came out in a lot of split safety looks because guess what? Jay Ajayi and Darren Sproles were down. So they weren't necessarily afraid of the run game of the Eagles. But when you looked at Carson's performance overall, there was a lot to be desired, particularly in the second and the third quarter. That turnover that he had coming out of halftime, the interception when he was targeting Zach Ertz on the stick route, and then, of course, that fumble that he had in the shadow of his own red zone, those plays can't happen. Now, when the Indianapolis Colts went up with that field goal, he did respond with a 17-play, 75-yard drive and ultimately put the game out of reach, and it took up 11 minutes in that fourth quarter. So you gave the Colts back the ball with 3 minutes left. So that was phenomenal. He was at his best when his best was required. I'm just looking in this game against the Titans for Carson Wentz to clean up some of the mistakes that we saw. Getting Alshon Jeffrey back will help. He was full go yesterday in practice coming off of that shoulder injury. So those are the things that will help him moving forward. But it was a performance in his debut that he can build on.
I think that's spot on. I went back and rewatched this game last night because there's so many games going on at 1 p.m. on Sunday. It was hard to focus on just one because I wanted to watch Luck more closely, and I certainly wanted to watch Wentz more closely. And what I saw in that game was rust as far as some of the ball security, a lack of sharpness on some of the throws, as you're mentioning.
Fully expected.
Absolutely. But what I also saw, which I didn't know if I could fully expect, was Wentz in the biggest spots, looking just like Carson Wentz, and some of the things that made him special last year, that made him the leading MVP candidate last year, which was 3rd and 9. You've got not only a pass rush, but they get to him. It's one thing to be pressured, nothing to be hit. Him to shed that hit, roll out to his right, hit Nelson Aguilar as part of that 17-play, 75-yard drive. The things that I would have been most concerned about if he didn't look the same on, because those are things that made him special. The ability, the passes downfield. In the game, the 2 games with Nick Foles, they completed 2 passes, 20-plus yards down the field. He completed 2 himself, or Carson completed 2 by himself, I should say, in last week's game. Like you saw, okay, once he gets more game action, some of the rust starts to fall away. He, I think, is going to be the same guy he was last year, which was, at least in my eyes, a legitimate concern. So I was very encouraged by how he played, particularly on that drive that salted the game away.
Yeah, I've said this for the last couple of years. Carson, he's a superstar. He didn't have to play well in week number 1 for me to know that. Like, the guys can play this game and which guys can play it at a high level. Also, I think that we think that a knee injury is a major injury anymore, and it's really not, and especially for a quarterback. If you look at our top quarterbacks in this league, that being Aaron Rodgers, he's had 3 knee procedures. Tom Brady shattered his knee in the pocket. Drew Brees, from the other extent, his shoulder had to be reconstructed. So a lot of times these injuries, we as people covering the game, we think that, man, when was the last time we've seen a premier player's career altered by an ACL? It's very, very rare. These are like normal surgeries now. So we should expect him to be able to come back and play at a high level. We shouldn't expect in the first game with no training camp, no preseason games, and missing the type of action that he missed it. Yes, when you start facing those live bullets, it is totally different. But the Eagles will be a different offense when they get their running backs back, when they get Alshon Jeffries. Zach Ertz cannot be their leading receiver. He's one of 3 tight ends in Oakland and in San Francisco that leads their team in catches and in yards. So how explosive are you going to be with Zach Ertz? I don't think that much. So Alshon Jeffries coming back will help out Carson in game number 2 as a starter, and their running backs. Philadelphia should be able to run the football. They are at their best when they can run the football. Last week, how effective were they doing that? Very, very limited with all the injuries, Chris.
Yeah, and teams are having more success against the Titans by running the football versus throwing the football. Now, Dean Pease, their defensive coordinator, I know him. He's going to try to throw a lot of exotic pressures at Carson Wentz. So, CC, to your point, that run game is going to be important for the Eagles to stay on schedule with that offense. 2nd and 6 are better. 3rd and 3 are better. Not being obvious downs and distances where you have to throw the ball. And I think there's an opportunity for Doug Peterson to keep that Titans defense off balance. You saw a little bit in that Colts game. They had those one-word audibles for Carson Wentz. He's barking it out at the line of scrimmage. I did like the innovation of being able to utilize that bubble screen off of the zone read action. That's something that we haven't seen from this Eagles offense. So rather than have Carson Wentz being your running threat, if the defense overcommits to that run game, then you can throw the bubble out there to the slot. So I think that's an interesting little twist in this offense. But again, Doug Peterson showing you that he's got a lot of answers to be able to offset the deficiencies of Carson Wentz until he gets his legs back under him. Because one of the things that makes Wentz special is his mobility.
So you brought it up, Alshon Jeffrey. He is cleared for contact. He could play this weekend, Chris Canny, week 4 against the Titans, which is a good game for him to come back to. What are you expecting from him? How much could he actually contribute? Again, another guy who hasn't played in quite a long time.
Well, I'm expecting this Philadelphia Eagles offense to finally get back on track. They haven't looked like themselves the entire season, even in the preseason. So going up against the Titans, who's a team that I think is false flagging, because you look at their first 3 opponents, you got the Dolphins, the Texans, and the Jags, not exactly explosive offenses. I think this is going to be the biggest test for them this season by far, and I'm not sure that personnel-wise they're going to be up to the challenge going against that Eagles skill position core.
And even if you think the Dolphins are actually a more explosive offense than they're getting credit for, that's the team they lost to. You know what I mean? Like the Titans, they beat Houston, they beat Jacksonville in an awful game. Don't rewatch that game. Don't take time to rewatch that 9-6 game. But your point on the Eagles offense is spot on. How are the Eagles right now 2-1? Because they have basically top 10 every category defense. They have the #1 rush defense. They're I think 8th in points allowed, 9th in yards allowed. Like they have been excellent defensively. Offensively, aside from red zone efficiency, they haven't done anything great this season offensively. I think that can change as Carson and Alshon Jeffrey, which is a huge addition, comes back.
One thing Doug Peterson's got to be careful in trying to get Carson up to full speed is you have to realize who you're going against. And going against the Titans, Marcus Mariota, lowest quarterback rating with anyone over 25 attempts. He's also the only one with 25 attempts that doesn't have a touchdown pass. In 6 of the last 8 games, 7 starts for him, he's thrown the ball for less than 200 yards. So why would I be trying to force the ball with Carson doing a lot of things that I might turn the ball over when I think that the Tennessee Titans are going to have a hard time going against that Eagles defense?
All right, Chris, stick around. Coming up, why did one quarterback call his benching a slap in the face? That's next up, First.
I don't know if he really been slapped, though.
No.
I've been benched before. I ain't never been slapped.
Daily Dollar deals are here at